This is the Book Legion Podcast, where we review thought-provoking books to give our Legionnaires the knowledge they need to dominate the next level of their life.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining me on the Book Legion. My name is Tyler Evans. This week I'm going to be reviewing the book, The $1 Billion Whale by Tom Wright and Bradley Hope. So really random how I picked this book up. We happened to be in Austin last year around Christmas time, and they have a really rad bookstore. I wish the name's escaping me. But we went to the bookstore. It's like 3 stories. And I was over in the business section, and this book was there, $1 Billion Whale. So it kind of caught my attention, right? It's got money falling down, and anytime we talk about $1 Billion Whale, and then you look at the subtitle, The Man Who Fooled Wall Street, Hollywood, and the World. I'm like, what? What's this about? So I ended up reading the back of it. It looked really good. I looked up the reviews on Amazon. They were really, really solid. The book came out in 2018-19. So I was like, shit, I'll give it a try. I really had no idea what it was about, other than what I read on the back, right? So, but the premise of the book and what it's about, it's based off of a true story. This guy, Jho Low, he's a Malaysian guy, was in his early 20s. Came from a little bit of money. His dad had done pretty well. His dad, Larry Low, had done well in the garment industry. You know, the average median income for a family to take home a month in Malaysia is about $1,000. And his dad had a net worth, somewhere between $10 to $15 million. I think he sold a garment factory for about $15 million. Numbers are kind of loose, but relative to most Malaysians, the Low family grew up very wealthy. There's still some speculation on potentially how they had money. It could have been grandfather. The dad said that's what he sold the garment factory for. Irrespective, they had a little bit of money. They sent Jho Low to the States to be educated. So he was educated in the States and in England, which is pretty common for more predominant wealthy families in Asia and other parts of the world. So how did this kick into so much trouble? So that he always had big dreams, big vision. He was someone that networked really well throughout college, knew lots of people, made lots of connections. He ended up befriending the prime minister of Malaysia, his stepson. They happened to live by them. They had an apartment in London, and they ended up kind of befriending them. He became friends with the stepson. So after befriending the stepson of the Prime Minister of Malaysia, he ends up obviously getting a little bit closer to the Prime Minister, getting with earshot. And so he eventually convinced the Prime Minister to open up a sovereign wealth fund, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a fund that's using taxpayers' dollars to invest in a project within the company to help bring more economic stimulus, right? So they were talking about redoing the downtown in the capital of Malaysia and bringing in, high rises and skyscrapers and bringing in more business, trying to attract especially more American and European businesses. So that was the premise. So Jho Low gets his hands on this money, which over the course of several years ended up being about $5-6 billion. And at first, seeming on the surface, he got hooked up with some old college friends with some of the royalties and some royal family members in Saudi Arabia. And through that connection, ended up getting involved in a company called Petro Saudi, which was an oil and gas company. And so it looked like he was doing some great things as far as diversifying the money, networking really well, bringing the royals in from the Saudi royals in on the deal, gave him a lot of credibility, not only to the Saudis that he had the Prime Minister's ear, but then to the Prime Minister that he was able to get connected with the Saudis, the royal family. Ended up taking them out on a huge yacht that the Saudis owned, the Prime Minister and his wife. The wife was really the one that also, I feel like, helped to drive and fuel kind of the stuff that happened. And again, I'm not going to go completely over what happened. I'll give you in a nutshell. The book is really incredible, the amount of detail. Tom Wright and Bradley Hope did a great job writing the book. It's about 385 pages. Lots of detail. They did a really good job documenting everything very accurately as far as from a timeline perspective. A very easy read for how long the book is. But really, the premise of what Jho Low did is he ended up stealing about $5.6 billion, like billion. And this is in his early to mid 20s, ends up stealing this money from the sovereign wealth fund, starts kind of doing a shell game. He learned from his dad how to set up shell corporations in the Caymans and other places where you can't trace who has the money. You can't get to the banks. And so he starts, using all this money all across the world to basically build what eventually became a media empire. So he was the one that actually created and funded Wolf of Wall Street, for a reference. He ended up befriending Leonardo DiCaprio, Paris Hilton, all kinds of celebrities he hung out with all the time. Jamie Foxx, Swiss Beats, all very good close friends, acquaintances of Jho Low when he was going through all this and the things that he was doing. Obviously, Martin Scorsese. I mean, just, the people he ended up getting connected with were pretty incredible. So he ends up building a Hollywood empire, which he wasn't the front facing on that. Everybody knew he was kind of the money, but he was not front facing. Actually, the prime minister's stepson was facing with another gentleman that he was friends with. So that he ends up buying real estate all over the country, and not like, I'm going to pick up a $500,000 house, here in Texas, picking up like penthouse suites in New York, buying huge properties in Beverly Hills, then often gifting those properties or giving them to the prime minister and the wife, having all kinds of crazy custom jewelry made for the prime minister's wife. I don't know how many multiple millions of dollars that she had in jewelry, but it was insane what they covered in the book, the stuff that they found. So eventually, this all kind of comes to a crashing halt. The crazy part is that he's never been caught. He's still somewhere in China. A lot of people did go to jail. The prime minister did get removed. A bunch of stuff did happen. That this went, global news, that this 20-something basically became friends with all these stars, all these politicians, made these movies, was buying real estate. He ended up buying a $250 million yacht, befriending all kinds of bankers at Goldman Sachs and the Deutsche Bank and all kinds of really high-profile players in finance, especially in Asia. So the reason why I wanted to cover this book in particular is because, one, it was a fun read for those of you who are like me, where you're kind of always reading personal development books or business books or sales books or leadership books. And I felt like this was, definitely as a business book, there's lots of tangible things to take away. And I'm going to cover 3 things I thought that were important from the book, lessons to be learned. First is, irrespective of what he did, which was completely wrong and I don't approve of or condone, but he networked extremely well. So the way he went about networking, it goes to show, which kind of tied into my second point, that if you are able to network well, one, you don't need a lot of money. But the second point is, if you do have a lot of money, you can buy friends. But you can't always buy happiness, right? And I know that's very cliche, but I think as the book progresses, the more money this guy takes on and the more he networks and is buying influence and basically buying friends, he ended up dating Miranda Kerr, a really famous supermodel, right? And Jho Low's, he's not your typical, stud. He's kind of a shorter, chubbier guy, very kind of socially awkward, kind of quiet, but very effective, very methodical, very kind of staged with how he did everything. So I learned a lot as far as from how to network, but then it kind of, to the second point, again, it was like, okay, well, you can buy influence, and I think you see that. Like, once you start to hit a different income level, right, like you can enter different social circles because you can buy, a plate at the table, right? Like you can buy a seat at the table, and you can't do that until you have money. And, Cardone talks a lot about this too. Sometimes you got to pay to play. And if they don't know you, you're not known, liked, or trusted yet, then the only way you can get there is by accumulating some type of wealth and then buying a seat at the table. And then once you get to the table, you can show how valuable you are. So I think that that's a good lesson, twofold for me. One, different strategies on networking, which includes using money to help network, but 2, to realize that, once you got your seat at the table, you still got to bring value, and it's still not going to mean that you, none of the shit matters, and this is why I like to read spiritual books, and they're being covered on here as well, because this guy had everything you could ever want, right? But at the same time, he went about it the wrong way. He screwed over a lot of people, so his life was just full of constant and sheer anxiety. at all times. Like he could never really relax because he was always having to keep up with the shell game. So, it's kind of those things like do the right thing, be honest, have integrity, don't fuck people over, because you always get caught. Like you always get caught. Like, even when you don't think you are going to, or you think, hey, it's just a little fib, it's not going to hurt. Like you always get caught. And, for me, everything is about, what Tony Robbins talks a lot about, that living is giving, right? Everything's about the law of reciprocity. So what you give out as far as time and intention will come back to you. So the more that you give, and you give with not expecting something in return, you're just like, hey, I'm doing this out of the kindness of my heart because it fills me up, then you will be poured into. When you start pouring into others because for no other reason than it makes you feel good and you know it's the right thing, then other people will return that when you least expect it and pour back into you. And obviously that didn't happen with Jho Low, because the guy was doing shady shit, man. And so he got caught. He fucked over a lot of people. He hurt his entire country. I mean, he stole $5.6 billion from a country that is not wealthy. And I think that sometimes here in the Western states, we don't often think about having, is normal in other parts of the country for people to have an income of $10,000 or $12,000, $15,000 a year. Like they're middle class, right? Like our middle class, we complain about raise the minimum wage to $15. So now, I'm not going to say whether I think that's right or wrong, but what I'm saying is that our complaints are trivial for the most part compared to the rest of the world. Like your bottom wage earner here makes more money. Like people in our poverty class probably make more money than most of, or the rest of the world's middle class, right? So I think it's always really important to put that into perspective, how other people live. And so when he steals that type of money from a country that it is really predominantly poor, it sucks, it hurts. And you'll have to deal with that type of energy, and that law of reciprocity will come back to him, what it already has, right? Like you got a whole fucking book written about what a piece of shit you are. Not real great. But if you want a book that's extremely entertaining, packed with all kinds of like crazy stories, it's kind of, to me, like I read The Wolf on Wall Street, ironically, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before it came out a movie, before he produced the movie. And I remember reading the book, and the same thing, like reading about Jordan Belfort, like the book was insane. Like the book was so crazy. I remember just reading it. I remember this is when I was living in Oceanside. Yeah, it's about 10 years ago. Maybe even before that, 2009, 2010, I think I read it. And I was like, there's no way this could be like real. Like this is not someone's real life. Sure enough, Jordan Belfort, we all know now, pretty crazy dude, but there were lots of tangible takeaways from business, but it was very entertaining to read and very fun to read. And the same with this book. So I definitely recommend the book if you're looking for like a good business book where you can pick up some practical advice, but you kind of want just something that's not going to be so heavy that you can read. It can be fun, entertaining. You get to learn about stuff about Leonardo and Paris Hilton, racing, other big finance players. Like, good book for you. So this is $1 Billion Whale by Tom Wright and Bradley Hope. Definitely recommend it. It's one of the best true story business books, crime books, or whatever you want to call it, that I've ever read in my life. So check it out. If you guys haven't done so, please subscribe to the podcast, and know that I will link the book in the show notes, so you can click down to the right over to the link, and it'll take you over to Amazon. You can buy the book. I think it's about 12, 13, 15 bucks, somewhere in there. Well worth it. It'll probably take you 3 or 4 weeks to read. Great book. If you guys haven't done so, I was just saying, please subscribe to the podcast. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Would really appreciate it. Give me a thumbs up, like, review. All those things help make it more accessible for people to find the book Legion and become Legionnaires. And so if you're listening to this, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you guys next week.